I am going to talk about scientific method, and this is a session which will be jointly conducted by myself. I am Sachin Patwardhan and my colleague P. Sundar. Uh, so, this is a session on scientific method, which is at the core of uh, doing research. As I said, in the course, we are going to have multiple modules and pieces of puzzles, and then you will have to put them together. So now we are starting another piece which is in research. So the very first piece is talking about what is scientific method. Uh, at the outset, let me say that even though uh, you have been studying science from your school grade 1, moving to your college, your first degree, most of you have done science except 1 or 2 faculty. Most of you are science students. Something that was not really taught to you was this scientific method. Your first introduction to scientific method was when you uh, did your post graduation, your MTech or your PhD. MTech or a PhD project is a training in scientific method. And what is this scientific method about? I am going to elaborate it through examples, some famous examples from the literature, and also some day-to-day examples or some examples from technical life. So the examples I have chosen are deliberately ones which would cut across all disciplines. So it should not matter what discipline you belong to. The idea is to get across this core thing called scientific method, which is at work. So what is this scientific method? Let's look at this definition of what the scientific method is. If you look at the definition from Oxford English Dictionary, it says it's a method or a procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century. It consists of systematic observation, measurement, and experiment. So these, just note these words, these are very important. Systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and formulation, testing, and modification of hypothesis. So this is a process, or this is an approach that consists of systematic observations, experiments, and formulation, testing, and modification of hypothesis continuously. It's not these hypotheses are not static; these change with time, and we continuously keep revising, modifying hypothesis. So if you want to put it in nutshell, what are the features of the scientific method? Well, it builds on previously available knowledge. This is very crucial, and this is a crucial aspect when it comes to doing research. It will become clear why I am emphasizing this. It continuously improves our understanding of the world, and in the process it improves itself. Okay, and the third thing is the most crucial aspect of scientific method is falsifiability or refutability or testability of a hypothesis, of a model or a theory by anyone who is qualified to do it. This is the most important part of the scientific method, that anybody who is qualified can actually test it in a meaningful way, and if he or she can find an evidence that does not match with the hypothesis, they can revise the hypothesis, they can change the hypothesis. Let's just put what are the steps in a scientific method. Well, it's not that I'm giving you these steps in the beginning because I want you to view multiple things either in the history of science or the things that you do in light of these steps. Okay, and you will realize that this is not what actually you do when you do your undergraduate or your school learning of science. So the first thing in scientific method is to formulate a question. We need to form a question that we want to investigate. In undergraduate or in schools, you are given a question. You don't formulate a question. Okay, you are given a question. You are supposed to answer it using some existing knowledge. Okay, here you have to formulate a relevant right question. Then what we do is develop a hypothesis or a conjecture that is a possible explanation for the question that you have formulated, and the conjecture or the hypothesis should be testable in a meaningful way by everyone who is qualified to do it. Okay. Then we carry out predictions based on this hypothesis and conduct experiments to test and validate the predictions. Okay. Analyze the results of the experiment, and finally, most important step, we communicate the results for a peer review. It could be at different levels. Peer review and dissemination could be a report produced in an institute, a thesis, a dissertation. It could be conference publication, it could be journal publication, it could be a patent. This is very, very important because your work is open to criticism and for others to develop on it. Somebody can build on it. So the first sentence I wrote about scientific method, it builds on the previous knowledge. So when you publish your work, your report, your results, whichever way you choose to do it, it is actually helping the scientific method because somebody else is going to read it and develop on it. Okay. So this is a very, very critical thing. Now I'm going to, before I actually get into this scientific method, I want to give some famous examples where the scientific method was at work. So two very, very famous examples. One is discovery of atomic structure. So this example deliberately I have chosen because it's from school now. Now this is taught in grade 9 or grade 10 students. So everybody can appreciate this example. So Thomson's experiment, this is we know this now, school textbooks, that in 1897 he did experiments of electric discharge through gases, and his experiments revealed that different elements contain particles, negatively charged particles. That time they were not called electrons, now we know them as electrons, and all of them are identical in all the atoms. So this was something that was discovered by Thomson's experiment. Well, subsequently, of course it was known by that time, this thing called atom is an electrically neutral entity. So there has to be equivalent positive charge in every atom. Okay. The question that really started being investigated by different physicists was this: what is the arrangement of protons and neutrons inside an atom? What is the structure of the atom? Okay. So this was the question that was being investigated at that time, and then it probably still being investigated, but in much more using much more different tools of theory and experiments now. Okay. So what we know is that the Thomson's model, okay, Thomson proposed a model which is known as the plum pudding model. So he said that the atoms are approximately spheres of 10 nanometer radius, and they have equal number of protons and electrons. Okay, that explains the electrical neutrality. Okay, and then they are arranged like a plum pudding. They are arranged like a or a blueberry muffin, where these blueberries are electrons which are floating in a cloud of positively charged particles. Okay, so pudding. So that was the idea that was first proposed, and it could explain electrical neutrality. It could explain it, and for some time it appeared that the question was settled, how they are arranged. It's a mass of positively charged thing in which these electrons are floating like raisins. Okay, now this could so there were other things like the electrons were free to rotate within this pudding, and the mass of protons is evenly spread in the. So the predictions like electrical neutrality could be very easily explained using this, but then some things couldn't be explained using this model. One of the things that couldn't be explained is spectral lines that are seen for different elements, that couldn't be explained. That was known by then. Spectroscopy had started developing way back in 1870s. So some of those things, observations couldn't be explained using plum pudding model. And Geiger-Marsden experiment, which was conducted in 1907, I'll talk about Geiger-Marsden experiment. The predictions of or observations of Geiger-Marsden experiment couldn't be explained using plum pudding model. So what was this experiment? So in this, Geiger and Marsden, they did a interesting experiment. They bombarded a thin foil of gold using source of alpha particles, positively charged particles, and they observed that, well, most of them go through, but some of them get deflected. Okay. Now if you do your calculations based on the plum pudding model, you cannot explain these deflections. The plum pudding model based calculations will predict that electrons, the alpha particle should go through, there should be no deflections. Okay. So why is this happening? Why some of them are getting deflected? So is there something wrong with the assumption of the plum pudding? So 1909 these experiments were performed, not in 1907, and some deflections were as large as 150 degrees. It was not some minor deflections, they were large deflections. So why were these deflections occurring? So the question was, is there something that we need to look at fundamentally about the atomic structure that will explain these deflections? Okay. So as I said, if the previous model was correct, all the electrons, all the alpha particles should go through without any deflection. So here what happened was an alternate model was used to explain the behavior. Around the same time, a Japanese physicist by name Nagaoka had proposed a model which is now known as the planetary model, where he proposed that electrons are like planets which are moving around the sun, which is some nucleus consisting of all positive charges, and electrons are moving in the space around the so the positive charges are concentrated like sun and electrons are like planets that are moving. So or they are orbiting like rings of Saturn. So this is called a planetary model. And Rutherford actually picked up this model. He found that this is an interesting way of looking at the atomic structure. He picked up this model. He developed the theory to explain the gold foil experiment, and indeed his predictions showed that, you know, if you use this model, then some of the particles will get deflected because the positive charge is concentrated in nucleus. Something comes very close to that, it will get deflected. If it passes through the space in between, it will not get deflected. So it could explain, planetary model could actually explain these deflections, occasional deflections. He could even come up with a formula that explained this scattering cross section versus these things that appear as a properties of material, based on properties of material and deflection angle. So this is one of the examples of scientific method at work. Okay, prediction based on planetary model was able to explain this deflections. So these experiments were again repeated, and then it was shown that the predictions which are based, mathematical predictions and experimental observations, almost match very well. And of course you know that this model also did not stand for a long. There were things that couldn't be explained using this model, and then Niels Bohr came up with a new model, and then Niels Bohr's model was again had problems, and then so this process of hypothesizing, modeling, predicting based on models, doing experiments to confirm the predictions. This continued, and I think it's still evolving. Probably the physicists in our group will be able to tell what are the latest developments in this area. I want to give another example. It's also a famous example. This is from biology. Discovery of DNA is something that all of you know has just changed the course of the history and even the science, the way we do biology. So this was a problem that was being investigated by many groups in around 1950s or 1940s. What is the structure of a DNA? Okay, so it was known that the genetic material transfer occurs through DNA molecules. That was known. Okay, by 1944, 1945, experiments had shown that even the nucleotides, even the four components, four molecules that form the basic building blocks of DNA molecule, those were known. The structure was those components were known. What wasn't known is that how they are arranged, how does that replication occur. Okay, and there are many groups were looking at this particular problem. Okay, so the experiments by Avery, MacLeod, McCarthy, so their experiments had confirmed that these are the carriers of the genetic information. So how does it happen? So what is the mechanism of storing genetic information? How is it stored and how it is transformed? So that wasn't known. So the hypothesis, the famous hypothesis was that is now accepted as a model for DNA. This was we attribute to Francis Crick and James Watson. They hypothesized the helical structure for the DNA molecule. I think all of you know about the helical structure, right? Everyone has some idea of this helical structure. So using this idea of the helical structure, okay, they used the helix transforms. They used mathematical models and transforms to predict that if DNA molecule has a helical structure, then if you pass X-ray through these DNA molecules, then the diffraction pattern should look like X. They had not done any experiments. This was just a mathematical prediction. Okay, if our model is correct, if our hypothesis of helical structure is correct, then that should show X patterns when you do diffraction studies for the DNA molecule. Okay, so this was a mathematical construct independent of any observation. Okay, or it wasn't coming from any biological considerations. Okay, so this was purely. So independently, experiments were carried out by Rosalind Franklin. She crystallized pure DNA and performed diffraction experiments, and what she found was, this X pattern. So this is one of the famous pictures in the history of science, the photo 51. So this result showed an X shape. Okay, and of course Rosalind Franklin didn't know what is the significance of this to the helical structure, but she found that this is very interesting result. She decided to publish this. Watson immediately recognized this is what they were looking for. Okay, and then they connected the dots. Okay, Watson and Crick produced their model. They used this as a evidence that look, this is what we have predicted mathematically. This is what is actually observed. Okay, and of course what happened is history. All of you know how it changed the course of biology that we do today. Okay. Let's try to abstract what is at play when you are. These are two famous examples, and then you might wonder and say that, well, what is it to do with me? I am neither Watson nor Crick nor So one of the myths that we have is that science and technology develops through these great innovations. Okay, we have nothing to do with it. which is what I want to actually discuss about, and then try to just instigate the thought that, well, or bring in the thought that it's not that that they are the ones who are the only one who are contributing to the science. Each one of us, okay, are actually contributing to the development of science and the scientific method. Okay, but let's again take a quick look. What is happening? We formulate a question. Okay, we examine the literature. It was very important. Look at this. All these things are happening in both these examples. Okay, the Rutherford, so-called Rutherford model is actually Nagaoka model. It's not really Rutherford model. Somebody else had proposed it. He had no way of proving that this is correct or wrong. So something else, actually. So looking at a literature is what Rutherford did. He tried to look at what are the different ways of thinking, and this was at that time looking at electrons as planets moving around a central core was an out of box thinking at that point. It wasn't a conventional way of looking at. So develop a conjuncture, develop a which is falsifiable, which means which is testable. Okay. Now this model which was proposed, it could explain electrical neutrality, okay, and it could explain something else, that was Geiger-Marsden experiment. Okay, so it could explain something else, and it could be tested in a meaningful way by, if you propose this model, do calculations, and then you can show that those calculations can be tested by conducting Geiger-Marsden experiment. If you are qualified to do it, anybody can do it. Okay, and that is very, very important. It was a everyone can. You carry out the predictions based on your hypothesis, and for something that has the same causative mechanism, electrical neutrality and Geiger-Marsden experiment have the same causal mechanism. What is it? Atomic structure. Okay, we are able to explain two different things, electrical neutrality and the deflections of alpha particles, using one fundamental thing, atomic structure. So same causative mechanism, atomic structure is the same causative mechanism. Okay, then you conduct the experiments to validate your predictions, analyze the results of the experiments, and what is very, very critical, we are going to talk about this a little more in detail, that communicate your results to the scientific community. For peer review and dissemination, students can be your peers. What is meant by peers? Who are the peers? What is a peer review? Can my student review my work and has an acknowledged expert in the same domain? Okay, so in the context of your, let's say when you are doing your research in a department and when you are presenting your work, the peers could be professors who are guiding the research or professors in your group lab. Okay, when you submit your work for conference or a journal publication, the editors will send this paper for a review to experts in that area. Those are the peers. Okay, so here we are not talking about in the context of scientific work, we are talking about these peers, okay, who are acknowledged experts in that area. Okay, so they are the ones who are and availability of your results to peer review is very, very crucial. Okay, so that is a very crucial step, and that's why you need to communicate your results. So actually technical communication and scientific method are inseparable. Okay, and we are going to have some sessions on technical communication. So why do we communicate our results? Why do we ask students to write reports? Okay, why should we teach them to do it properly? Okay, why should we write papers? And because we want to make our work open to criticism. We are going to learn from it, somebody else is going to learn from it. Okay, so it is not necessary that, so I am putting down these steps here. Okay, in many situations it may not exactly happen like this. Okay, but overall if you look at the development of an area, this is what is happening. Okay, it may not happen through one person or one group. Okay, over a period of time, this is what happens. Okay, it may happen, chronologically, in a different, the steps may not be exactly chronological. For example, in DNA example, helical model was proposed by Watson and Crick, which was in Cambridge University. Then prediction based on hypothesis were carried out by another group, Wand, Crick and Cochran. Experimental verification was done by Maurice Wilkins and Rosalind Franklin, that was King's College London, and this was happening differently, at different places, and collecting the dots was done by Watson and Crick. So over a period of time, maybe 5, 6, 7 years, this process happened. And if you look at what happened is the steps of the scientific method. The scientific method was at play. So they may not be in the chronological sequence. For example, the Geiger-Marsden experiments were actually conducted first, and then Rutherford proposed his theory. So he did not predict that if you do this experiment, then alpha particles will deflect. So it may not exactly happen in the same sequence. Yeah. So now this is where now I want to start talking about what is its relevance of this scientific method to our work. When you are going to do you are going to work with graduate students in your colleges, and you will be also continuing your research work. All of you have been coming out from IITs and NITs, and so you would be continuing your research work. So the question that would come is that, what is it for me here? Why are you talking about the scientific method? Well, what I want to point out is that any postgraduate or doctoral research project is actually a training in the application of the scientific method. Okay. So when we are training postgraduate students here at IIT Bombay or any other institute for that matter, the underlying agenda is to create a manpower or create people who can apply scientific method. If you are being employed by a company R&D, it is because you know how to apply scientific method. You can take a topic, idea, look for what is happening in the literature, collect literature, relevant literature, okay, formulate a new hypothesis, a model, create a method or create an approach to test it meaningfully, and come up with analysis. You can disseminate that to the other peers. That is what you are being hired for. Okay, that is what a student will be hired for in a company, in an R&D, because, well, the student may have, my student probably has worked on some specific problem here that may or may not be of interest to the company. What the company is looking for is a person who is trained in, given, if you throw a new problem to him, that person should be able to deal with that. He should know how to collect resources, how to gather information from the literature, how to formulate a new idea systematically, test them, and come up with a solution. So that's what you are being trained for. So let's look at this. What is the cycle of steps? So it consists of characterization, observations. You make some observations from experiments, or you make some observations from the literature. So this initially involves some collecting data. Okay, data could be experimental data could be from the literature. Then you form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a fundamental or a causative explanation for certain phenomena that you observe. Okay, we carry out predictions. We try to predict a scenario which has the same causative mechanism, or the same fundamental cause, and then we can say that, well, you can do such and such experiment to check the predictions. So you carry out the experiments. If your experiments validate the hypothesis, you accept and go ahead. If they do not, then we go back and change the hypothesis. Okay, go back and change the hypothesis. In undergraduate training or in the schools, you were never asked to do this. You could never question, you could never formulate your own question. Here you are supposed to formulate your own question. You are supposed to come up with a possible explanation. Okay, in an exam you had to come up only with the correct explanation within 3 hours. Here there is no time limit. You can come up with an explanation, see whether your explanation is correct or not. If not, go back and change the hypothesis, go back and change the model, and you keep doing it till you come to a conclusion that, well, this model or hypothesis stand a test of the scientific scrutiny, and then we communicate that to the. So I want to give you a very simple example which is from the day-to-day life. Okay, an observation is, let's say computer monitor display is blank. Okay, I come to my lab, I see. Okay, what could be an hypothesis here? I want to solve this problem using the scientific method. Power is off. Yeah, let's say power is off. So entire power failure. What is your hypothesis? Has the power in the building failed? Let's say I take the. So what could be a prediction? So if you see, I should be able to predict something that is the same causative mechanism as this. Yeah, so how do I test this hypothesis? There is a general power failure. Suppose that is my hypothesis. How do I test it? Other switches, other equipment. Okay, so general power failure is the hypothesis. Okay, so all the powered equipment should be down. Okay, and then switch on the other equipment. Okay, now what we find is that some of them are working, some of them are not working. Some of them are working, some of them are not working. Okay, so the hypothesis is found to be false. So you go back and rehypothesize. How will you rehypothesize? What could be another hypothesis? Now we see that it's not a general power failure. So what could be a hypothesis? Particular phase is down. Yeah. So within a room there are multiple phases. Okay, and I have this hypothesis that one particular phase has failed. So what do you do now? See, if you come up with a hypothesis, you should be able to predict something else which has the same causative mechanism. If this hypothesis is true, something else should happen. What is it? Yeah, then you give an experiment. Anybody can do this experiment. Okay, so how do you know that? How do you know that it is failed? That particular phase, maybe that the device itself has failed. Okay, so if your hypothesis is that one phase has failed, and if there are 5 other equipment connected to that phase, logical thing is to come up with an experiment that checks, all other equipment that are connected to that. Okay, so we switch all the equipment that are connected to that, and suppose we found that they are also not working. Okay, suppose this is found true, then we accept this hypothesis and go ahead. So this is when you are doing this simple task, okay, of finding out a causative mechanism for why your monitor is not working. Actually you are applying the scientific method. Okay, what is most important in the scientific method are the experiments. The experiments are supreme. Okay, anybody who is qualified to do this should be able to conduct those experiments and check your hypothesis. Okay, so this is testability in a meaningful way, falsifiability, and this is critical. Okay, you cannot come up with a hypothesis that aliens have come, and it is not somebody can come up with this hypothesis. Okay, but is it testable in a meaningful way? It is not. Okay, So this will not really stand the scientific scrutiny. So what is critical is reproducibility. Okay, can you reproduce your results? So that's why we publish them, so that others can see. Why if you have written a report in your MTech, or if you have written papers in your PhD, no, the supervisor would have said document every small detail. Sometimes when you are a beginner you get bugged. Why he or she who is your supervisor is asking me to write every small detail. What is the purpose? The point is, somebody else wants to reproduce your results, they should be able to reproduce the results. That is critical. Otherwise your work, they are not able to reproduce the results, they will just throw it in the dustbin. Okay, it does not stand the test of time. So this is very, very important. Okay, well, the science developed through multiple such hypotheses. Multiple hypotheses together form a theory or a model, and then multiple such models form a theory. Multiple people are actually using these models, hypotheses, and applying it for a variety of situations through their dissertations, through papers, and that is where the science develops. Okay, that is where the science develops. Somebody finds that this particular model is not really working here, and if he or she decides to, or that group decides to publish it, somebody else will take it up further and then develop a new hypothesis. Okay, so a scientific theory is something that has withstood all or several falsification tests. Multiple people, large number of people have tried testing it, and they found it that it holds in so many scenarios, and these scenarios are being created by us. Okay, through your projects, through your students' projects, they will be created now that you start your career in as a teacher. I want to give a little more different example from the domain of engineering. I hope this particular example will you can appreciate, even though it does not require any specific engineering background. It is a simple problem. I want to look at air conditioning system of this room. This is our department's computer lab. Okay, how do I efficiently manage temperature distribution in this room? So what do I need to do first? What will you do first if you are asked to design or evaluate? As a person in science, what will you do? Do you directly start using temperature sensors for designing the system? What do you use? What is the first thing? All of you are science postgraduates. Temperature measurement. So when there is no room at all, I start putting temperature measurements? No. What do I need to do first? I need to write a model. Unless there is a model how temperature changes inside the room, okay, I have to do calculations, right? What is the load, air conditioner load? What is the heat load? I need to do calculations. So first thing that I do is to develop a model. So I need to have a hypothesis. Okay, I want to have a hypothesis for this room. What would be a good hypothesis to start with? Say, will the temperature inside this room, if I make a hypothesis that there is one uniform temperature inside this room, as a first hypothesis, what do you think? And there are fans, no? There are fans rotating. So I could argue that, well, there is a good mixing of air. Yeah? There is one single temperature inside the room. Can I make that hypothesis? Is it reasonable? How many of you agree? Okay, how many of you disagree? So if you disagree, you should have an alternate hypothesis. What is the alternate hypothesis? See, I am designing, I want a simple model. What is the alternate way of thinking about it? We will come to that. Okay. So my first hypothesis is that I need to design this. So you, in schools, you have done simple heat calculations? Yeah? Some, Cp into delta T. This is 10th class. Yeah? So, what is the heat loss? What is the, so those kind of calculations need to be done for finding out what is the load of air conditioner for this system. So I need to have a model, and then I can take a very simple example, a simple hypothesis that the temperature inside this room is uniform, there is one single temperature, okay, and then I need to, the temperature outside is something say 25 degrees is uniform. So there is, you know, the heat, if this is cooler, if this is to be maintained at 20 degrees and outside is 30 degrees, you know, there is a heat flow from outside to inside through walls, through, you know, the flooring, and then through the top and so on, through windows, through doors. Is there any other source of heat that I need to look at? Machines, there are so many computers, each computer is, you know, and then humans, each one of is like 25 watt bulb, I don't know, okay, so we are like, you know, bulbs, so we are emitting heat. So number of students, so we need to actually look at effect of doors, walls, see the heat flow from this door and this door where there is glass might be different, so we need to develop a model for this, okay. So look, this is my schematic diagram for this room, and let us say we have these air conditioners and we have some exhaust fans and doors, and so I develop this model and then I can do predictions, you know, based on this model that, you know, the temperature inside should be so and so if 4 air conditioners of this particular size and this particular capacity are put, then you can do a predictions, okay. So this is, we have this room, we have put the air conditioners, but everything is based on a model. So now what is the test of the, how do you test this hypothesis? How will you test this prediction? That based on this hypothesis, the hypothesis says that there is one single temperature measurement sensors. So I can put temperature sensors at different locations, these red dots are temperature sensors, and then I could measure the temperature under different conditions, okay. So it may happen that we are assuming that this entire room is behaving like a single mixed tank, and you know, the predictions are done by carrying out the heat balance, okay. So typically your project will be something like this, you know, your MTech project or PhD project, you are given some problem, you are supposed to come up with a model for that, carry out predictions, and then you conduct experiments to validate your predictions, okay. Now your model might work quite well when there are no students inside, okay, you did some experiments without people sitting inside and some other experiments with people sitting inside. Model worked well for, but suppose your experiments show that you know, when the students are sitting inside, this single mixing or single temperature model doesn't seem to be the right way of going about, okay. So experimental evidence doesn't agree with the hypothesis that there is a single temperature, because if you collect data, okay, in some region the temperatures are different, in some region the temperatures are different, okay. So now what could be alternate way of looking at the problem? What is the another model that you can? So this area here, the stage area will have a different temperature, yeah, and the machine area and you know, student sitting area will have a different average temperature. So I could propose a compartmental model, okay, I could propose a compartmental model. See, you don't require this modeling which I am talking about here, I am not putting any equations, it is just, you know, qualitative conceptual models, okay. So and you can appreciate without being mechanical or air conditioning engineer, you know. So what do you do? So what I can do is, you know, experimental evidence suggests that there are zones, okay. In this zone there is one uniform temperature, in that zone there is one uniform temperature. So I can propose, and then it's possible that near the entrance there is again nobody sitting, okay. There is a third zone where there is uniform temperature. So this is zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. So I could come up with these zones are, you know, conceptualized models, there are no physical zones here, okay. So we could come up with a model okay, we could come up with a 3-zone model, okay, and say that within each zone the temperature remains uniform, okay. So this is a single tank model, well mixed, all fans are working and everywhere the temperature is uniform. Experimental evidence showed that this is not the correct way of looking at it. You might come up with a 3-zone model, and then there will be heat exchange of heat between this zone and 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 outside and so on through walls, and then you could work out and then you might decide, after developing this model, you might decide how to place, your design problem will be then how to place air conditioners to solve uniform temperature problem in this room. So now somebody I am trying to put it in a simplistic manner. Suppose you start doing a project like this with your students. With student A you will propose first model, single tank model, ask him or her to do experiments. One MTech project is over and then you see that it is not matching. So you tell the next student, well, let's look at a 3-zone model, okay. And the 3-zone model gives some good answers, but still when the density of people sitting inside, it may not match. Then you might say, well, I should come up with a multi-zone model, yeah, and multi-compartment model. So the third student might, so you as a faculty are looking at this, developing this model for this particular room using different students, and each one of them is contributing in his or her own way to the scientific development, okay. The person who is contributing may not see what is happening, you are aware what is happening, you are trying to build this. Then you might come up and say that, well, somebody else might come up and say, oh, this compartment model business is not correct, the right way to do it is a partial differential equation, okay. I should write, what is the equation? Laplace equation? No, what is it? Laplace equation, right? You can write the Laplace equation, partial derivative of second derivative of temperature along x direction, along y direction, and how it changes with time. So that is the best way of doing. And there are faculty from maths department here, yeah. So you might say that, well, PD is the right way to go, and then there might be somebody from statistics and say, no, you should use Monte Carlo, okay. So a simple problem of designing, this air conditioning system for this can get into different complex forms depending upon what level you want to stop and you want to look at, okay. So maybe I want to look at Monte Carlo simulations with student populations changing with time and so on. So it could get into partial differential equations subjected to stochastic inputs, right? So you can develop complexities of this, and then those could be student project over the years. Over a period of time, okay, a model develops, the hypothesis get revised, okay, and this is where the scientific theory is at work, the scientific method is at work, okay, and every student is actually contributing to it in two ways. One, contributing to the model, the other way, learning how to apply the scientific method, okay. He or she is being trained on applying scientific method, so this is critical. So these new predictions, you go on changing this hypothesis, you go on changing the models, and you compare with the evidence, come up with an experiment, and then you go on refining these models. This is a iterative process, okay, and this is what happens, okay. Somebody finds an interesting observation, like Rosalind Franklin found an interesting observation. She couldn't explain the X pattern, but she decided to communicate, and that changed the history of biology. Watson and Crick picked up that observation, tried to see whether their hypothesis works, their hypothesis, the prediction of their hypothesis actually exactly confirmed this observation, and then they communicated that to the scientific community. So actually technical communication, writing what you are doing and making it available for peer review at different levels, right from your department to international community, is an extremely important part of the scientific method, okay. Though in I don't know whether the courses of introduction to research was done in your respective institutes when you started your career. It is still not taught at many places, I think, except IIT Madras, where there is a systematic exposure to research, introduction to research. Well, nobody talks about what is happening. Okay, we figure out maybe after some time that this is what is happening, but you propose a model, you hypothesize, carry out predictions, and then you publish your results of your predictions and testing. You communicate. Somebody else might pick that up, might revise the hypothesis, come up with a new model, and new. So that's how the theory develops. Okay, so each one of us are contributing to it. So one thing that you should dispel from your mind is that it's not that some Newton sitting under the apple tree. Research, formulate the research options, formulate the hypothesis, okay, perform experiments to collect data, okay, analyze and interpret the results, and publish the validated results, okay, and reset. And so this is the process in which you have been trained indirectly when you did your project, undergraduate, postgraduate project, and this is what is expected when you carry out your research. You train the students in this technique, and in the process you train yourself, you improve yourself, you contribute to the method and to the literature. Okay, so this is what I wanted to stress, that contrary to the belief, the scientific theory develops through effort of many people. Each one of us is contributing to it. Don't think there are only Einsteins and Niels Bohr who contribute. Each one of us contributes to development of science. So when you carry out a project, okay, you apply some idea to some, you might be using some idea in domain A to something in domain B, okay, something new comes up out of that. So application, a novel application is a very good way of starting projects, you might find a new way while doing that, okay. For example, a lot of people in computer science are talking about deep learning, okay. Now I work in control systems. I see, well, we have been using many deep learning techniques in control systems even prior to this, but now many people have started again looking at them, deep learning methods, whether you can improve control algorithms using models based on deep learning and so on. So it's cross application, something new comes up which has not been seen probably by a computer scientist when you apply it to a new domain. And then at times when you are doing this, some new ideas come up, new models come up, new hypotheses come up, okay. So this theories, models keep changing with time, that's very important. So just I'll go through this very quickly. Undergraduate training, of course, you are not supposed to question, not supposed to alter anything. You are learning through textbooks, you have to accept the models and theories and never question them, okay. So even though you learned science, you were never taught the scientific method, it is only taught to selected few, okay. Then you were given, what is given importance is faithful application of science, this accepted theories, and you conduct experiments only for verification, okay. Whereas when you do this in a postgraduate context, your project is your first introduction to the scientific method. Till then you were never introduced to this, okay. Your postgraduate project, it could be applying an existing theory or a model to a new problem. See, for example, let's say partial differential equations subjected to stochastic inputs were never applied for design of an air conditioning system. That could be a novel application, okay. And while you do that, something new might come up, okay, which you don't know. Or it could also be trying some completely new hypothesis, new theory, okay. So it could be of two types, and both of them are equally important, okay. Many times a project is mixture of both of them. Sometimes you start with this, you end up with this, you never know how it happens. it's not a recipe, it's not a recipe, okay. So typically your projects that you spin off for your students will belong to these two categories, okay, and you end up modifying, questioning models, hypotheses, theories, and so on. Okay, so what are the common pitfalls? The common pitfalls are you assume that a hypothesis or a conjecture is correct without testing. Okay, typically the way this happens is ignoring data that is not conforming to the hypothesis. Okay, this is in the beginning when students start doing their project, you will find this, and you should keep an eye on this because you have given some conjecture, you have given some hypothesis, some model. Actually, what they don't know is that the model or hypothesis that you have given is only a calculated guess. It's not that it is correct. Okay, you have just given a good guess to start with. Okay, and the experimental evidence, whatever numerical experiments, theoretical experiments, derivations that you do in a proof might show the otherwise. No, it is not correct. Okay, the students in the beginning have this tendency of not showing uncomfortable results to the guide. They think that supervisor has told me this model, this must be correct. Okay, so if the system is showing something else, we tend to sort of keep it aside. Maybe I did some wrong experiments, So it could be that the error that you are getting actually is pointing to some phenomena which you ignored. Okay, so this is a common pitfall, and you should keep an eye for look for this. So not reporting failures is a very common problem when the students start in their learning about doing research. Okay, then drawing conclusions based on insufficient or erroneous measurements, that is another common pitfall. Okay, so you should repeat the experiments, make sure that it's not one of a result, and multiple results, multiple experiments give you same. And finally, systematic. If there are some gross differences between the model predictions and observed behavior, maybe you have ignored something, you should revise your model. Okay, so this is very important. So we are going to do a small, not really hands-on, but a session where interactive session after this. But the takeaway message from this particular lecture is this: that we don't pretend to teach you scientific method through this. We just want to sensitize that something like this is at play when you are doing your research, and you should be aware that this is what is happening. Okay, and we just hope that this awareness will help you eventually, will help you to grow as a researcher and improve your research over a period of time. Okay, so again, what I said is important. It's not a do-it-yourself recipe. It's not a recipe. Okay. Well, it's a iterative process. What I would say is that you start with some hypothesis in the beginning. So to propose a good hypothesis, you first do a literature survey. Okay, and you try to see how different people have tried to propose hypothesis for this particular problem. So you take heat, calculating heat load for air conditioning. So you start looking at how people have developed models for this, and then looking at their way of thinking, you can probably propose something that will improve upon the existing models. So looking at the literature critically is a important aspect of coming up with new hypothesis, and it's an iterative process. You propose hypothesis A, then you test something, then you think of new things to explain which are not being explained by this hypothesis A, then you go to B. So it's an iterative process. So that's what I said. It's not I can't give you a recipe for proposing a good hypothesis.
That's the most difficult part of research, solving a textbook problem which has already been solved and solving a research problem which has not been solved. If the hypothesis was so easy, people would have already solved it. Correct? So I'm not giving you a negative thing, just that you need to be aware, you need to acknowledge that there are other people like you working throughout the world looking at similar problems. So, it is very important you do a very thorough survey. Very often it happens that you get an idea, somebody else also gets an idea at the same time. Both of you searched the literature, but did not find that hypothesis was there, so you pursued it. It just so happens that the other person published it first, correct? Even though yours is as good as the other person. So, there is nothing like good or bad, you just need to, a hypothesis is bad only after you find that the hypothesis failed, the prediction from that hypothesis failed, correct. So, there is nothing bad or good at the beginning. How to get a nice hypothesis that gets accepted is just that do a thorough literature survey, so make sure that it has not been done before, at least that you should ensure.